The hospital corridor stretched before her like a memory. White, sterile, unforgiving. Zari Kande's fingers tightened around the patient chart as she heard the familiar voice at the nurse's station. 8 years of careful distance collapsed in an instant. Her heart recognized him before her eyes did. Officer Park Ji-woo stood with his back to her, his broad shoulders beneath the dark blue uniform, his posture still impeccable after all these years. When he turned, time seemed to slow. Their eyes met across the crowded emergency room, and 18 years of shared history hung in the air between them. "Nurse Kande," he said formally, his voice betraying nothing to those around them. But Zari saw what others couldn't, the slight softening around his eyes, reserved only for her. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. How did they end up here after everything? How did a promise made to a dying mother lead to this moment where everything she wanted stood before her, yet still felt impossible to reach? If you're new here, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and leave a comment below if you're enjoying this story. Now, let's go back to where it all began. They crossed an ocean chasing safety, never knowing fate was waiting first. The airplane hummed beneath them as 10-year-old Zari pressed her face against the small window, watching clouds part to reveal glimpses of an unfamiliar coastline below. Her mother, Mariam, squeezed her hand gently. "Look, Zari," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of hope and fear in equal measure. "That's Hajin. That's our new home." Zari studied her mother's face, the dark circles under her eyes, the determined set of her jaw. Since Papa died, Mariam had carried the weight of their world alone. This program, this chance to work as a caregiver in South Korea, was their lifeline. "For how long, Mama?" Zari asked, not for the first time. Mariam smiled, tucking a braid behind Zari's ear. 2 years, maybe 3. Long enough to save, to build something secure. Then we decide what comes next. Together. The plane dipped lower, revealing a coastline dotted with buildings in colors Zari had never seen before. The mountains rose in the background, mist clinging to their peaks like reluctant ghosts. "Will they like us?" Zari whispered. Mariam's eyes softened. "They will know us by our work, by our character. We stand tall, we work hard, we keep our promises. The rest will come." Hajin greeted them with a symphony of unfamiliar sounds, scents, and textures. The International Elder Care Program representative met them at the airport, a brisk woman with clipboard efficiency who spoke English in clipped, precise sentences. "Mrs. Park is 92, the woman explained as they rode in a taxi through winding streets. "She requires daily care, but is still mentally sharp. The family has arranged accommodations for you both in the garden apartment. Her grandson visits weekly to oversee her care." Zari watched her mother nod attentively, committing every detail to memory. The taxi climbed higher into the residential hills overlooking the harbor. When they arrived, the house stood like a guardian at the top of a steep driveway, traditional curved rooflines meeting modern glass and steel. An elderly woman waited on the porch, supported by a tall, serious-looking young man. "Mrs. Park," the representative said with a deep bow, "and Mr. Park Ji-woo." Mariam bowed deeply, nudging Zari to do the same. When she straightened, Zari caught the young man, no more than 17, studying them with curious, careful eyes. "Welcome," he said in English, his voice unexpectedly deep. "My grandmother is pleased to meet you." The older woman smiled, speaking rapidly in Korean. Ji-woo translated, "She says you have kind eyes, and that is what matters most in someone who provides care." Mariam smiled, relief washing over her features. "Please tell her I will care for her, as I would my own mother." After Ji-woo translated, the elderly woman reached for Mariam's hand, patting it gently. Then her eyes fell on Zari, and her smile widened. She spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Grandmother says the child has old eyes," Ji-woo translated, looking directly at Zari. "She says you have seen much for one so young." Zari didn't know how to respond, so she simply bowed again, lower this time. That night, in their small but clean apartment behind the main house, Mariam held Zari close as they looked out at the unfamiliar stars. "We will be okay here," Mariam whispered, more to herself than to Zari. "This is the beginning of something better." 6 months passed in a blur of routine and gradual adjustment. Mariam worked long hours, caring for Mrs. Park with gentle efficiency. Zari attended the international school, struggling with Korean but excelling in mathematics and science, where numbers spoke a universal language. Jiwoo appeared every Sunday, checking on his grandmother with quiet attentiveness. He rarely spoke directly to Zari, but occasionally she would catch him watching her as she did homework at the kitchen table, his expression unreadable. One rainy Tuesday in November, Mariam kissed Zari goodbye before school. "I'm taking Mrs. Park to her doctor appointment today," she said, straightening Zari's collar. "I might be late getting home. There's food in the refrigerator. Lock the door and finish your homework." Zari nodded, memorizing her mother's face without knowing why. "I love you, Mama," Mariam smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "And I love you more than all the stars in the sky. Never forget that." That was the last time Zari saw her mother alive. The call came during Zari's final class. The school counselor appeared at the classroom door, just her face carefully composed in that way adults have when bearing unbearable news. The bus accident had been quick, they said. Mariam hadn't suffered. Small mercies wrapped in devastating finality. Mrs. Park wept when they told her, clutching Zari's hands in her gnarled ones, speaking words Zari couldn't understand, but somehow felt in her bones. That night, Jiwoo arrived, his face grave as he spoke with officials in rapid Korean. Through the fog of grief, Zari heard fragments. Undocumented minor. Temporary placement. Child welfare services. When the officials left, Jiwoo knelt before Zari, who sat motionless on the couch, her mother's scarf clutched in her hands. "Do you understand what's happening?" he asked, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. Zari nodded. Though understanding and accepting were entirely different things. "They want to take me away," she said, her voice flat. Jiwoo's eyes showed a flicker of surprise at her perception. "Yes, your mother's work visa was tied to her employment. With her gone, there are complications." "Where will I go?" Jiwoo looked away, then back at her. "For now, child services. Then they will decide. Maybe back to your country if you have family there." "I don't," Zari said simply. "It was just Mama and me." Later that night, Zari overheard Jiwoo speaking with his parents on the phone. His voice was low, insistent. "She has nowhere else." "Yes, I understand it's complicated. No, it wouldn't be adoption, just temporary guardianship until they sort out her status. She's just a child, and she was in our care." 3 days later, Jiwoo returned with his parents, a stern-looking man with salt and pepper hair and a petite woman with Jiwoo's same watchful eyes. They spoke with officials while Zari sat in a sterile waiting room, her few belongings packed in a borrowed suitcase. When the door opened, Jiwoo motioned for her to join them. The officials explained through an interpreter that the Park family had agreed to temporary guardianship, a rare arrangement for a non-relative. But given the circumstances and Mrs. Park's attachment to Zari, exceptions were being made. "This is temporary," Jiwoo's father said in halting English, his expression serious but not unkind. "We will provide home, school, safety, but your future must be decided properly by law." Zari nodded, understanding the boundaries being drawn. "Thank you," she whispered, while bowing deeply as her mother had taught her. The Park family home was in another part of Hajin, larger than Mrs. Park's house, modern and minimalist. Zari was given a small room that had once been a home office, hastily converted with a bed and desk. "You're safe here," Jiwoo told her that first night, standing awkwardly in her doorway. "But this is temporary, do you understand?" Zari nodded, clutching her mother's scarf. "I understand." Life with the Parks fell into its own rhythm. Jiwoo's father worked long hours at his architecture firm. His mother, a university professor, was kind but reserved, clearly uncertain how to connect with the quiet African girl suddenly living in their home. Jiwoo became Zari's reluctant translator and guide. He drove her to school, helped with her Korean homework, and explained cultural customs she didn't understand. Their interactions were formal, careful, a dance of politeness with clearly defined steps. "Why are you helping me?" Zari asked him one afternoon as he corrected her Korean writing. Jiwoo paused, considering her question. "Because it's right," he said finally. "And because no one should be alone in a place they don't understand." Months became years. Zari's Korean improved steadily. She made a few friends at school, though she kept most people at arm's length, afraid of the inevitable questions about her family, her background, her future. Jiwoo graduated high school and prepared for his mandatory military service. The night before he left, he found Zari sitting on the back porch, staring at the stars. "I'll be gone for 18 months, he said, I sitting beside her, but keeping a careful distance. Zari nodded, something tightening in her chest. Ji-woo had become her constant. Not quite a friend, not quite a brother, but something essential nonetheless. "I've spoken with my parents," he continued. "Nothing will change with your arrangement while I'm away. You'll stay here until you finish school." "And then?" Zari asked, the question that haunted her every night. Ji-woo looked at her directly. "And then you decide your next step. You'll be 18 by then, an adult." Zari hugged her knees to her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Ji-woo nodded, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep studying hard. Make something of yourself that would make your mother proud." The years passed in a blur of study, growth, and quiet determination. Zari excelled academically, her Korean becoming nearly fluent. She kept her mother's scarf and a small voice recording, the only tangible pieces of her past. Ji-woo returned from military service more reserved than before, his boyish features hardened into a man's strong jaw and steady gaze. He enrolled in police academy training in Seoul, visiting home only occasionally. On Zari's 18th birthday, Mrs. Park, Ji-woo's mother, sat her down at the kitchen table. "You graduate in 3 months," she said carefully. "We need to discuss what comes next." Zari nodded, her hands folded in her lap. "I've applied to nursing programs." Mrs. Park looked surprised. "Nursing?" "Yes. I want to help people. And it's practical. There's demand for nurses everywhere." Mrs. Park studied her for a long moment. "The state offers support for young adults transitioning out of care. Housing assistance, educational stipends, we've already inquired." The message was clear. Her time in this house was coming to an end, as had always been the plan. "I understand," Zari said, her voice steady even as something inside her trembled. "Thank you for everything you've done." Mrs. Park's expression softened unexpectedly. "You've been no trouble, Zari. You've worked hard, respected our home, our rules, but you need to build your own life now." 3 months later, Zari moved into a small studio apartment provided through the state support program. Ji-woo helped carry her few boxes, his silence heavier than usual. "You have my number," he said as he prepared to leave. "If you need anything." Zari nodded, fighting the urge to reach for him, lying to ask him not to go. "Thank you." He paused at the door, turning back. "Zari." She looked up, something hopeful fluttering in her chest, but Ji-woo simply nodded. "Good luck with nursing school." 2 years passed. Zari threw herself into her studies, determined to build the future her mother had sacrificed everything for. She rarely saw the Parks, though Mrs. Park called occasionally to check on her progress. Ji-woo had graduated from the police academy and taken a position in Seoul. Zari followed his career through Mrs. Park's occasional updates, carefully avoiding asking direct questions about him. What she felt had no name. Yet, when Zari was 20 and Ji-woo 23, they encountered each other at Mr. Park's birthday celebration. Zari had been invited out of courtesy and almost declined. But something pulled her back to the house that had been her temporary home. Ji-woo stood taller in his civilian clothes, his shoulders broader, his presence somehow taking up more space than she remembered. When their eyes met across the room, something electric passed between them, a current of recognition that had nothing to do with their shared past and everything to do with who they had become. "You look well," he said when they finally spoke, standing awkwardly in the kitchen where he had once helped her with homework. "So do you," she replied, studying the man who had emerged from the serious boy she'd known. "Seoul suits you." "And nursing suits you," he said, a small smile breaking through his reserve. "My mother says you're top of your class." Zari felt a flush of pleasure at his awareness of her achievements. "I work hard." "You always did." They fell into conversation that flowed more easily than it ever had before, about her studies, his work, books they'd read, changes in hygiene. For the first time, they spoke as equals, as adults with no obligation to each other, but the choice to connect. When his hand accidentally brushed hers, reaching for a drink, neither pulled away immediately. The contact lingered, electric and forbidden. Later, as guests departed, Ji-woo walked her to her car. "It was good to see you," he said, his voice lower than usual. Zari looked up at him, suddenly aware of how close they stood. "It was good to see you too." Something shifted in his expression. A question. A possibility. And for a breathless moment, Zari thought he might close the distance between them. Instead, he stepped back. "Drive safely." That night, lying awake in her small apartment, Zari confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. What she felt for Jiwoo was not gratitude, not familial affection, but something deeper and more complicated. Something impossible. What if what we feel is real, but forbidden? The thought haunted her. Jiwoo's family had taken her in during her darkest hour. How could she repay that kindness with feelings that would only bring gossip and judgment? How could she face the whispers, the assumptions that would follow them? When Jiwoo called the next day, Zari let it go to voicemail. When he texted suggesting coffee, she replied that she was too busy with exams. She built walls of excuses, of distance, of time. Jiwoo eventually stopped reaching out, respecting the boundaries she established. They returned to occasional, were formal interactions at rare family events. The unspoken hung between them like a ghost, seen only by them, but powerful enough to keep them circling each other at a careful distance. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below telling us what you think will happen next. Your support helps us create more content like this. 8 years passed like a slow-moving river, carving deeper channels of experience and independence. Zari completed her nursing degree, worked at hospitals in Seoul and Busan, building a reputation for competence and compassion. At 28, she accepted a position at Haejin Memorial Hospital, drawn back to the coastal city that had become, against all odds, the closest thing to home. Jiwoo had remained in Haejin after all, rising through the ranks to become a respected detective. She learned this from Mrs. Park, who still called occasionally. Their relationship mellowed into something like distant affection. Zari had dated occasionally, careful, contained relationships that never threatened the walls around her heart. None of them knew the story of the orphaned African girl and her Korean guardians. None of them needed to. Then came the night in the emergency room, a rainy Tuesday that echoed with memories of another rainy Tuesday 18 years before. Jiwoo stood at the nurse's station, discussing a case with the charge nurse. Zari froze mid-step, clipboard clutched to her chest. 8 years since they'd last spoken directly, yet she recognized the line of his shoulders, the cadence of his voice, as intimately as her own reflection. When he turned and saw her, something flashed across his face, surprise, recognition, and something deeper that made her heart stutter. "Nurse Candy," he said formally. "Detective Park," she replied, equally formal, aware of the curious eyes of her colleagues. They maintained professional distance as Jiwoo interviewed a patient involved in a domestic disturbance. Zari assisted, their interactions a masterclass in polite detachment. As he prepared to leave, Jiwoo paused at the nurse's station where Zari was updating charts. "It's good to see you back in Haejin," he said quietly. Zari looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time that night. It was time to come home. The word hung between them, home, with all its complicated implications. "How long have you been back?" he asked. 3 weeks? Jiwoo nodded, while processing this information. "My mother didn't mention it." "I didn't tell her," Zari admitted. "I wasn't sure if you were staying," he finished for her. "Yes." Jiwoo glanced around the busy emergency room, then back at her. "Are you staying?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Zari felt it settle on her shoulders, demanding truth after years of avoidance. "I think so," she said finally. "Yes." Something shifted in Jiwoo's expression. A door opening after years locked shut. "We should talk," he said. "Properly, after all this time." Zari hesitated, old fears rising like shadows. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "It's been 8 years, Zari," he said, her name soft on his lips. "We're not who we were." 3 days later, they met at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. Jiwoo arrived in civilian clothes, dark jeans and a gray sweater that softened his professional severity. They exchanged polite updates about their careers, the weather, changes in hygiene. The conversation flowed more easily than Zari had feared, but underneath ran currents of all they weren't saying. Finally, as their coffee grew cold, Jiwoo leaned forward. "Why did you pull away?" he asked directly. "After my father's birthday party, all those years ago." Zari looked down at her hands. You know why. I want to hear you say it. She met his gaze, finding courage in his steady presence. Because I was afraid of what I felt, of what people would think, of losing the only family connection I had left. Jiwoo nodded, his expression grave. I respected your choice, even when I didn't agree with it. What would you have done differently? Zari challenged gently. I would have told you the truth, he said simply. That my feelings for you began after you left our home. That I waited because I wanted you to build your own life first, without complication, without power imbalance. Zari felt something tight in her chest begin to unravel. When? When what? When did you know what you felt? Jiwoo considered the question. The day you graduated, you stood so tall, so confident, no longer the lost girl who came to us, but a woman who had built herself from loss. I was proud of you, but it was more than pride. Zari swallowed hard. And now, after all this time? Now I'm tired of silence, he said quietly. We've lost 8 years to fear and propriety. I don't want to lose anymore. Your parents are not the arbiters of our lives, Jiwoo interrupted gently. We're adults, Zari. We have been for a long time. People will talk, she insisted. They'll say things about you, about me, about what happened when I lived in your home. Let them, Jiwoo said with surprising fierceness. We know the truth. Nothing improper ever happened. You were a child in need, and we provided safety. What grew later, between adults, is entirely separate. Zari felt tears threatening. It's not that simple. Some things are. Jiwoo reached across the table, his hand covering hers. This is one of them. That night, Zari couldn't sleep. Jiwoo's words echoed in her mind, challenging years of carefully constructed barriers. Why she found herself reaching for the one thing she had never been able to open, her mother's final letter, written days before the accident, and discovered among her belongings afterward. For 18 years, Zari had carried it, unable to face her mother's final words. Now, with trembling fingers, she broke the seal. My darling Zari, if you're reading this, something has happened to me. First, know that I love you with every breath in my body. You are my greatest joy, my proudest achievement. I don't know what will become of you in this new country if I am gone. I pray someone kind will look after you until you can look after yourself. But I know you, my strong, stubborn girl. You will survive. You will build a life worthy of all our dreams. Remember what I told you about fear? That it's useful only when it protects you from true danger, not when it keeps you from living. Don't let fear become your prison, Zari. I crossed oceans so you wouldn't have to live afraid. If love finds you again, don't run. Grab it with both hands, cherish it, fight for it. Love is too rare to surrender to fear or doubt. I will always be with you, in every brave choice, every moment of joy, every act of kindness. Look for me there, not in grief. All my love, always. Mama tears streamed down Zari's face as 18 years of grief and guilt crashed through her. Her mother had known, somehow known, that fear would become Zari's shadow companion. The next morning, Zari called Jiwoo. I need to see you, she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. And your parents. All of you. That evening, she sat in the Park family living room, the same room where decisions about her fate had been made so many years before. Jiwoo's parents looked older, but still carried themselves with the same dignified reserve. I want to thank you, Zari began formally, for everything you did for me when I had nothing and no one. You provided safety when I was most vulnerable. Mrs. Park nodded, her expression softening. You were a good girl. You never gave us trouble. But I need to say something else, Zari continued, her heart pounding. Something that might be difficult to hear. Mr. Park straightened, exchanging a glance with his wife. Jiwoo and I? Zari paused, gathering courage. We care for each other, as adults, as equals. This began long after I left your home, and we've kept our distance out of respect for you, for appearances, for the complicated history between us. The room fell silent. Mr. Park's expression remained impassive, but Mrs. Park's eyes widened slightly. But I can't live with silence anymore, Zari continued, not after reading my mother's last words to me. She placed the letter on the coffee table. She told me not to let fear become my prison. For too long, that's exactly what I've done. Jiwoo, who had been silent until now, spoke. Father, Mother, I respect you more than anyone. But in this, I must follow my heart. Zari and I have waited years, keeping appropriate distance, building our separate lives. We're not asking for permission, but for understanding. Mrs. Park looked between them, her expression unreadable. People will talk, she said finally, echoing Zari's earlier fears. They will, Jiwoo agreed. Frightening until they find something else to talk about. There was never any adoption, Mr. Park said suddenly, his deep voice filling the room. Legally, you were a ward of the state under our temporary guardianship. There is no family relation. Zari nodded, heart pounding. I know. Still, Mrs. Park sighed, there will be questions, assumptions. Then we will answer them with truth, Jiwoo said firmly. No secrets, no shame. Mr. Park studied his son, then Zari, his gaze penetrating. You both understand what you're choosing? The difficulty? Yes, they answered in unison. A long silence followed. Finally, Mr. Park stood, his decision made. Then, as your father, I say this. Love with honor is never wrong. If this is your choice, make it with courage. Mrs. Park's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. 18 years ago, we took in a child because it was right. Now that child is a woman who has earned her own path. Who are we to stand in the way of what honest hearts decide? The relief that washed over Zari was so profound, she felt lightheaded. Jiwoo reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Thank you, he said simply to his parents. 2 weeks later, as cherry blossoms began to dust Haejin's streets, Jiwoo took Zari to the harbor, where she and her mother had first arrived 18 years before. I wanted to bring you here, he said, because this is where your story in Korea began. Zari looked out at the water, remembering her mother's hopeful face as they stepped off the ferry. She would have liked you, she said softly. My mother. She valued honesty and hard work above all else. I wish I had known her better, Jiwoo said, Horn taking Zari's hand. But I see her in you, in your determination, your compassion, your quiet strength. They walked along the harbor, comfortable in shared silence, until Jiwoo stopped, turning to face her. I've waited years to ask this, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Will you build a life with me, Zari? Not as the girl who once needed shelter, but as the woman who chooses her own path? The simplicity of the question, not grand, not theatrical, but honest and direct like the man himself, brought tears to Zari's eyes. Yes, she whispered, then more firmly, yes. Jiwoo didn't kiss her there on the public walkway, still mindful of propriety, of the journey they'd need to take to help others understand their story. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, their breath mingling in the space between them. Some love waits, he said softly, not because it's wrong, but because it's patient. 6 months later, at a hospital fundraiser, Zari stood beside Jiwoo as they faced the inevitable whispers, the curious glances. When the hospital director asked about their relationship, Zari answered with the clear, confident voice she had developed over years of building herself from loss. Detective Park and I share a unique history, she said. His family provided me safe harbor when I lost my mother as a child. Years later, as adults, we found something neither of us expected, a love worth waiting for. That night, walking home under stars that had witnessed her entire journey in this country, Zari finally felt the weight lift from her shoulders. She belonged, not as a guest, not as a ward, not as an outsider, but as a woman who had claimed her place through love, work, and courage. She touched the scarf around her neck, her mother's scarf, now worn smooth with time and memory. I found it, Mama, she whispered to the night air. The love you wanted for me, the life you sacrificed everything to give me. And somewhere in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of the sea, Zari felt her mother's answer, not in words, but in the profound peace that comes from honoring both where you come from and where you choose to go. Thank you for joining us for this story of love, patience, and finding belonging against all odds. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts, and hit that like button to help others find our content. Until next time, remember that some journeys take us far from home only to lead us back to where we truly belong.